All right, we are here once again. This is, I believe, a first. This is your third time appearing on Content Minded Zoomer Schopenhauer. And
That's right.
yeah, it's great to have you on. We have a lot to cover. Uh, to quote, I know it's passe, the film, but to quote Joker, things are really getting really crazy out there, haven't they? I had this. We're here to talk, obviously, about the issue of Iran, but specifically about things that people aren't necessarily thinking about in terms of resources, ecology, and energy. I think uh, we'll focus more on causes later on if it's applicable, right?
Yes.
But I think that you have a very nuanced take on the situation, and we'll cover other things as well. But I had this take just to set as a preamble. It seems that people don't really. What's going on in the background?
No, I was just setting myself up.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, he's building a time machine, folks. No. Anyways, yeah. To set a preamble, I had this take about how you used to. If this was maybe, I think, even 10 years ago, you would hear takes about what would be the ecological implications of destroying tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, of you know shelling refineries and LNG plants. I believe the largest LNG plant in the world was hit recently.
That's
It
correct.
seems that yeah, and it seems that that type of thinking has sort of left us, and but that's sort of like it's very strange how even in leftist circles ecological thinking has become passe. But
Hmm.
you have the floor is yours, ZS. And if you have to talk about a certain country, I would prefer if you say IS. Everyone
All
knows what
right.
that means for YouTube. Um, but go ahead. What's the floor is yours? What is your analysis of the Iranian campaign? And eventually, I want to ask you as well about what you think the logical outcome could be. I mean, it's very hard to there's a lot of slop streamers that have various predictions, about things, but what's your assessment of it? What do you want to lead off with? The floor is yours.
There's only one theory cell point that I really want to make, which it comes from a paper by Robert Ayres, which is a very, very excellent paper, where he argues that the cost share of GDP, the cost share of energy in GDP
Mhm.
is what people tend to think of. So the size of the energy sector is something like 3-5% of an economy. It's much higher in a petro state, but
Right.
for like in the global economy, it's like 3-5%. And the thing is that represents the cost share. That represents the cost of extracting and delivering the materials and so forth. Now, the point is that the output elasticity is much larger than the cost share. So, because energy is not merely an input into the economy, it is a physical enabler of work, transport, heat, materials processing,
Right.
agriculture, mining, logistics. Like everything that you need requires energy. It's a fundamental input into everything. So, in other words, even if like
Including food production, which people have
yeah, including food
neglected. Yeah.
production,
Yeah.
and so it's everything. And so the thing is that if you have some decrease in the input, it's a bit like if you think of a sailor. The sailors didn't necessarily die of the fact that they had fairly sustained, generally caloric deficits for long periods of time. The sailors in, like, to say, the 18th century,
Yeah.
they had to do a lot of work and they didn't have huge calories. What was actually killing them was the fact that they weren't getting the vitamin C and they were dying
Yes.
scurvy. So this thing, which is a small part of the body, but you take it out and it tanks the system, and that's kind of how you should think about it. Whereas in mainstream economics, that's not how you tend to think about things.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably, in my opinion, the single biggest distortion of GDP. And an obvious example of this is kind of Russia, because like if you look at pure GDP statistics, nominal GDP, then Spain has a bigger economy.
Right.
But that's ridiculous, right? Everybody knows that Russia is a much more important economy and economic power than Spain in real terms.
Yes.
But in any case, the reason why this is important is that if you look at a supply shock in the place with the most concentrated energy in the world, the effects are giant just from a reasonable, biophysically informed theoretical set of assumptions. So this is that's just the kind of that's just the only kind of theoretical thing that I really wanted to emphasize before just diving into all of the
Right.
details. But yeah,
Well, I think to a more theoretical point, I always go back to Chad Haig's book, Being an Oil. He was making more of a philosophic point about the nature of oil being the means by which being reveals itself. But even just in material terms, let alone a sort of metaphysical point, in material terms, oil is essentially the foundation of modernity, or at least modern economy and economism, and um, just the means by which you can have a population of 8 billion people around the world. Oil pretty much has become, through plastics, through
yep,
e-commerce, through logistics, essentially the means by which we sustain life itself. And now that you have a potential massive disruption, there was this articles that you were sharing by, I believe, on Substack. His name is something Sorcerer.
the honest
Uh,
source.
the honest sorcerer, like just the absolutely mind-bogglingly grim implications of the Strait of Hormuz being closed for more than a few months or even a
Yeah.
year. So if you could go into some of that, um, yeah. Well, we see, and
So
also like I think the real-time ecological changes we might potentially see as well. If you recall, during ClownVid, we had quite a number of even just marginal ecological shifts due to lack of productivity in certain
yeah.
activities of agriculture and so on and so forth. But yeah, go ahead, my friend.
Okay, so here is, I think, a little bit of just oil 101, which I think we should just quickly go through.
Yeah, go
Uh,
ahead. Yeah.
so the first thing is, what is in a barrel of oil? What is in a barrel of oil? And the answer is that there's basically three different kinds of things that come in every single barrel of oil. Because a
Mm-hmm.
barrel of crude oil is not something that we consume. The only thing which consumes a barrel of crude oil is a refinery, which distills all sorts of different things from that barrel of oil. And
Yeah,
second,
there's also like various distillates that are important for different areas of production as
that's
well.
right.
Like,
So there's
even the
different.
oil paint I use has petroleum elements
Yeah,
within it.
yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so you have different distillates that come in every single barrel of oil. And secondly, not all barrels of oil are equal in that barrels of oil which come from different places have different
Right.
concentrations of different kinds of distillates, which can have major economic impacts because not all of them are as important as the others. And also, when you have a refinery typically takes something like 150,000
Mm-hmm.
barrels of oil a day. And it costs several billion dollars to make a refinery. And it's a big industrial project. And certain refineries are designed for certain kinds of barrels of oil. So, just to get into what's in a barrel of oil, so you have the light distillates, and the light
Mm-hmm.
distillates are what are called LPGs, or liquefied petroleum gases. So that's things like propane and butane, which you can use for residential heating and cooking. It's also used as a petrochemical feedstock. You can mix it in with gas in a car.
Well,
It's
there's
not a
different grades of gas as well
yeah,
that are made.
yeah,
So yeah.
exactly. And then secondly, you have naphtha, which is also a petrochemical feedstock. It's for plastics. It's used for solvents.
Mm-hmm.
It's used in high octane gasoline blending. And then the most important light distillate, or arguably the most important light distillate, is gasoline or petrol, which
Yes.
is used for cars and small engines and generators. So then you have middle distillates. So the middle distillates are kerosene, which is used for heating and lighting, and heating oil and lighting in developing regions. And it's also a precursor for jet fuel. Then you have jet, which, I mean, it's kind of obvious what jet is used for.
They put a
And
number of different substances in it to gellify the kerosene as well,
yeah,
and jet fuel. Yeah.
and then of course you have diesel slash gas oil.
Hmm.
That's used for shipping, trucking, mining, agriculture, freight, rail. You know, this is the stuff which is the lifeblood of the global economy.
Right.
It's irreplaceable. There's nothing which has the torque. There's nothing which can be produced on a mass scale. There is nothing more important to the fundamental economics of everything than diesel.
Hmm.
And then you have heavy distillates, like vacuum gas oil. You have fuel oil, which is for like marine shipping in particular, as a heavier, bunker fuel. And then you have asphalt, which is used for roads, roofing materials. And finally, you have pet coke, which you can use
Yeah.
for making cement and
Oh
certain
yes.
kinds of
Yeah.
very dirty power generation. Um, so that's basically what's in a barrel of oil. Now, if you look at the oil which is being disrupted from the Middle East, the overwhelming kind of oil that it is what's called medium sour oil. And it's very easy to access medium sour oil. So it
Oh,
has
okay. Yeah.
so what you have is basically you can rank different kinds of barrels of oil. Heavy oil would be, for example, Venezuelan oil is very heavy, and it has lots. So it's good for things like pet coke or asphalt.
Canadian oil
And
sands as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what it is, and that's what you get from it. So it's good for tar and roads and burning things. Now, what you have in America, America's oil is very light and sweet, so it's good for things like petrochemicals. It's very
Hmm.
good for gasoline, but it's not very good for middle distillates. It's not very good for diesel, and it's not very good for sulfur. Now,
Right.
Middle Eastern oil is medium sour, very, very easy to access. And it's therefore extremely important to the global economy because it is the biggest source of diesel, which is just simply the lifeblood of our civilization. So, as we've established, if the price of oil goes up, that means that disproportionately the crack spread, so the crack spread is the difference between the price of crude oil and the price of the refined products. And so the crack spread for diesel has gone up. The crack spread for jet has gone up. And that's partly because the best things to refine these products are being cut off. But secondly, it's also because these things we store a lot less well compared to simple crude oil. We don't have as much stored products here as we have stored crude. And so this has giant implications because the supply shock that we're having is already several times bigger than the amount
Hmm.
of oil which was restricted in the 1973 OPEC embargo or the 1979 Iranian Revolution. It's simply a much bigger scale. Now, if we go into the broader material constraints, because it's not just oil that is being that's very, very important, that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Because it is sour oil, 92% of the world's sulfur comes from oil and gas processing, and
Hmm.
something like 50 to 70% of the world's sulfur comes from the Strait of Hormuz. And so if you don't have sulfur, then you do not have sulfuric acid. Now, sulfuric acid is absolutely essential for copper, cobalt, and nickel extraction because you need to use acid leaching to take your rocks and take your ores and actually extract need from them. And of course, these things are all absolutely essential for electronics, semiconductors, advanced electrical equipment, electrical infrastructure. And so, in other words, if you think of like, oh, we need to get onto renewable energy because of this crisis. Look, because of how integrated all of these different materials are, no, the price of making anything goes way up.
Well,
Not only
you
that,
even
but
mentioned helium, for example, is
yeah,
very
well,
important to chip production.
40% of the world's helium, roughly, comes from Qatar, and
Yes.
that's essential again for semiconductors and chip manufacturing. You need that extremely pure helium environment to do a lot of this engineering, and that's simply a massive shortage that's being cut there. And also, you have LNG. Now, 20% of the world's LNG was going through the Strait of Hormuz. It's almost all from Qatar. And that leads to very severe electricity shortages in Asia. And it was also the fuel which was being used to make semiconductors in Taiwan, which have a practical monopoly on it. And the LNG is a very, very bad news for Europe because it means that America is now Europe's almost their only supply now of natural gas, because they had to get off pipeline gas from Russia when Nord Stream was blown up. So then they had to had to build out a huge LNG infrastructure, and they took in a mix from the Middle East and America, and now the Middle East has been cut off. And not only has it been cut off, but the Iranians have actually attacked infrastructure. A huge amount of that is going to be offline for years.
Yes.
And there was also, so what you're looking at is a situation where aluminium, petrochemicals, shipping fuels, fertilizers are all disrupted. So not only with fertilizers, about a third of the world's fertilizer that has been shut off. It's also the natural gas, because liquefied natural gas that was coming out of the Middle East, in order to fuel the Haber-Bosch process to get you ammonia and to get you nitrogen fertilizer, you need natural gas. Natural gas is the feedstock for getting the high heat temperature to fixate the nitrogen. Now, what this means is that you're going to see severe food insecurity in parts of Africa and Asia, and you're going to see an upbidding for fertilizer prices that would be going to other places, which means that you're going to see serious food inflation. The other thing is that this is urgent because we're in the planting season right now. We live in a physical economy. It is springtime, and fertilizer is not coming through. Now, without the Haber-Bosch process and without nitrogen fertilizer and synthetic fertilizer, around about half the population of the world simply would not exist. It simply wouldn't exist. About half of the nitrogen in your body comes from the Haber-Bosch process. This is not something that you can do at a large scale with electricity. It's natural gas, and the biggest source of refined products has just come offline and is being physically restricted. So that is a very, very, very serious crisis. So you build all this together, you look at all of these flows, and you can see that this is inflation for everything. And it is not just oil, which is still the hemoglobin of the global economy. It is natural gas, it is fertilizer, it is so many of the most fundamental inputs. And because these are all internationally traded places, the places in Asia, like Japan, South Korea, Australia, which are facing imminent shortages, these things are internationally traded. They will be upbidding. They will be doing all that they can to prevent, Europeans or Americans from getting these products. So the real, and of course, not only is there production shut down, but also when you shut down because of the physical stoppage of the Strait of Hormuz, it takes a long time for things to just get back up and running. You can't just switch these things off and on.
Exactly. That's what people were saying. Even just the industrial process of drilling for oil, or a lot of the LNG plants that haven't been bombed but are shut down.
Yeah.
It takes an extenuated process to even get the engineers back in to start up a lot of the different machinery and so on and so forth. It's not just like you turn on the switch and the energy comes. It's not like,
yes.
I don't even think nuclear power plants sort of kind of they have a long process as well, but not nearly as long as a lot of these direct um, fuel sources like LNG. But that was another issue. People were talking about nuclear.
Yeah,
And while, Germany, for example, got rid of a lot of the nuclear
that's
infrastructure
true.
for some stupid reason. And like you mentioned, Nord Stream, I believe they still have partial access through Turk Stream or through another one, but um,
I mean, I think that the remaining natural gas pipelines, which are functional, mainly go to southeastern Europe,
mhm.
Hungary. I don't think they're going to Germany.
But that's another thing geopolitically. If you're looking at this from like a NATO wave sort of like American government perspective, uh, without using too colorful language, if you're looking at it from the sort of for lack of a better term, like that type of um, I want to say one word, but one word is too associated with a certain thinker. But let's
Mm-hmm.
say, yeah, for example, NATO wave type of perspective. Is this not sort of empowering Russia, Hungary, China, Iran to a lesser extent? It seems that the lifting of sanctions towards Iranian oil, towards Russian LNG,
Well, you see,
very
what's
counterintuitive to the NATO perspective, right? Yeah.
well, what's I would say that what's interesting is that what Trump has done is he has imposed very severe economic costs on Europe that are
Right.
worse than the costs which come to America in this unilateral, well, really bilateral attack on Iran. I also really do not buy for a second that this was quote unquote about China.
I
Some
want to
people
get into that as well. Yeah.
to claim that this is about China. I mean, the only reason why China was getting discounted Iranian oil in the first place was because of American sanctions, which a lot
Yes.
of which were actually under Trump. Now, you've given them cheap oil in the first place, and then you're now saying, "Aha, we're going to stop it getting to them." Except actually, we're going to unsanction the Iranian oil because we want to keep the prices as low as possible to stop a domestic backlash. So actually, the Chinese are still getting their Iranian oil. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Now,
Yeah.
let's just put that aside, though. Now, the physical reality is that Fujairah is the end part of the pipeline, one pipeline, which can get out of the Strait of Hormuz.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's under severe attack by the Iranians, and it's now intermittently open. The Iranians also attacked Yanbu, which is the end part of the east-west pipeline, so that's also questionable. Now, there are some workarounds to the Strait of Hormuz, and Iranian oil is still getting out, but these are coming under attack and will come under continued attack if the war continues.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, now the Houthis are also going to get involved as well.
Yeah, well, if
yeah.
the Houthis get involved and they shut down Bab el Mandab, then that means that you have to go all the way around Africa instead, which essentially makes things a lot worse for Asia, which is where things were going anyway, because it just makes the whole thing more inefficient and expensive. So yes, there are some workarounds, but for the most part, it's actually shut, and there's very low levels of traffic. And there's not signs that it's going to imminently open as of the time of speaking, as of right now. And the thing is that there's a deep asymmetry here. The Iranians need relatively, I don't want to say low tech, but relatively inexpensive technology to keep the Strait shut.
Right.
A narrow strip, they need relatively inexpensive tech. They just need like some cheap ballistic missiles from locations around the coast. They can do a speedboat run, and they can use drones. And the thing is, these are big and slow and hulking targets. They're very easy targets.
Yes.
Big tankers. And secondly, they don't even need much more than, say, a 1/3 successful hit rate. If people were like Zerg rushing their way through it. They would only need like a 1/3 success for, again, the insurance premiums and the kind of disincentive to be like, we're not taking this extremely valuable thing and have it like taken.
And this is a martyr society as well, which is beyond the comprehension of a lot of people in the West.
Yeah.
So they would be willing to do this as well, even if a few boats get toppled by American artillery. So
and so the thing is that it's very easy to keep it shut, and basically it is a profound point of immense leverage. Yeah. And essentially what's happened is that this is a case, I think, of something called I would say that the psychological reason why this happened was a case of risk homeostasis, which is the idea that, if you drive through a red light and nothing happens, you keep doing it, and every time you do it, you discount the risk even more because you think
you're habituated to it.
And so America had done two things under Trump in the lead up to this, which I think gave Trump this increasing risk homeostasis. Now, the first one is the July War, which is that there was bombs. There was a bombing run on Iran. Before that, there was actually also Soleimani strike in January 2020. But this run, there was the July War, 12-day war, and also there was the successful yanking of
Maduro
in Venezuela and replacing him with Delcy Rodriguez, who essentially has given the Americans everything they wanted.
Yes.
Now, I think that Trump's mentality is we have done fairly bold moves and nothing has happened. And therefore, because he has shut out voices of dissent in the administration, because he has this kind of Stalinist court where he's ritualistically humiliating the people around him and keeping voices of dissent out, then he's actually gotten to the point where he thinks that they can really do something with the Iranian. Now, I think that the reason why they care so much about the Iranian regime is because of a certain small country in the Middle East, because it matters to them a hell of a lot more than it matters to the United States as to this regime.
Well, we said, I think even last time we recorded, I believe, the geography, the resources, the influence upon the region that the Persians have, but let's not go too far already in that. But it's true, yeah. Like the Iranians, there was a time where I think that during the global war on terror, there was a time astonishingly under Ahmadinejad, when there was partial cooperation between him and Bush, even though, he would go up there and say, redact to America and all that stuff. But there was a sense of rationality there, I think, where there could have been a begrudging cooperation.
Well, what I think has basically happened.
Yeah.
What I think has basically happened is that the Iranians have always had the trump card of closing the Strait. Yes. Especially now, it's become easier. But they've always had that trump card. And what you've done is I think the mentality of the Iranians is, well, look, we could shut the Strait of Hormuz, but we'd probably all get blown up by American military hardware. So we probably won't do it. And then you have unprompted done it anyway. And so they said, well, what else can we do now? This is our only means to maintain the existential survival of our regime. And the difference between the cartel regime of Venezuela is they were people who were psychos. I think Maduro is a psychopathic character. These are not idealistic people. They are just doing managed decline at absolute best of Venezuela, extracting the profit for themselves. This is somebody that Trump understands.
They're not even like Chavez, who had the whole leftist parapolitics mystique about him. Like when he
there's no mystique at all.
Yeah, there's no mystique in
But look,
yeah,
this is someone that Trump understands. A Shiite 12-er Muslim who was a veteran in the Iran-Iraq war.
And was tortured, by the way. Yeah.
Who is expecting and preparing the return of the Mahdi, This is the people he's dealing with. These are religious people who believe in their divine mission and commission. These are the IRGC is an organization with many heads of the Hydra. It's got 200,000 people in it. And these people, they all believe in a shared cause, and you can decap leadership, you can decap placement of the leadership and the replacement of the leadership, but there's just plenty more where it came from, and they are dedicated to regime survival under any circumstance. And these are not people that you can deal with in this way. I'm not saying that it's impossible to rationally have come to some kind of an accommodation with the Iranian regime. I think it probably was, but of course you can't just use brute force to remove people who truly believe in an idea. And this is actually something which kind of goes back to Vietnam.
Yes.
It's a similar situation, to be honest, because you a lot of Viet Cong, but you can't, and they just kept coming back and back and back. And I mean, I think that you probably could have defeated the Viet Cong if you fully committed to an invasion, but that's a completely separate hypothetical. The Americans
That would have been, it would have required a long, protracted occupation as well.
Which the American public and democratic system was not actually prepared for. And that's the thing, is that America is constrained by politics. It is constrained by squeamishness. The Americans are squeamish about casualties. The American system will not allow for a ground invasion. And so here's the thing. The problem with the state of Hormuz right now is that the path dependencies are unbelievably existential. This is worse than 2008. It's worse than COVID. It's worse than the Great Depression. Like, this is the worst possible thing short of World War III, which could happen to the global economy. Now, something has to give. Something has to give here. You can't just let this continue until it just boils over into an unfathomable crisis. Something has to give, because the price of oil, if you just kept it shot, the price of oil would go up to $250. People use 200 as this kind of scare number. Look, in 2008, the price of oil went up to 147. In July 2008, that was the last high. But in our money, that's like $230.
Right.
This is worse. This is a worse situation. Now, do I think it will go to 250? Well, that's a different question, because does it last that long? Now, I don't know, but what I can tell you is that I think that of the three parties we have gathered here at the table, I fundamentally doubt the Iranians budge. They have had severe casualties. It's actually true that they don't have an air force or a navy. But the difference is that
they kind of don't need one.
Well, the thing is that America has air superiority, but air superiority doesn't buy you the same kind of dominance which it used to.
Right.
Because you can have a bunch of decentralized, located, cheap missiles and drones, which wasn't the case, for example, when America launched either the first or the second Gulf Wars.
Right.
However, people, I think, exaggerate. They kind of exaggerate stockpile issues. America does not have terrible stockpile issues. That there are interceptors and radars which have been destroyed, and that does matter. But the Americans have sufficient air dominance that you can actually just fly a plane over Iran and drop a bomb pretty much anywhere. You don't need to use a very sophisticated missile. So the Americans can't kill anyone. They actually can do that. But Iran has the advantage of this extraordinary leverage, which you can only really dislodge if you launch a ground invasion, which the Americans are going to do. And I'm very confident about that. So the question is, of the three parties at the table, the small country in the Middle East, the big country in the Middle East, and Mr. Taco, what's going to happen? Now, I think that Trump cops out. I think that he buckles.
People were predicting this for, they would Taco again.
That's what has to happen. The thing is that I think Trump already wants to Taco, but the problem with war is, once it gets rolling, it is a complex disaster which is outside of any one man's hands.
It's like a spiritual force in some ways. So a lot of things happen that you don't even predict. Yeah,
it's unleashed. Something has been unleashed here which no one man can control, and you can't just get out of that when you feel like it. That's not how it works. The Iranians need to exert a certain level of pressure in order to extract the concessions they want, and the Americans, you can't just they are now under immense pressure, because now the Americans, they don't want a nuclear Iran. They don't want these various scenarios, and so they feel very compelled to continue the pressure. Now that they've started this completely stupid war, but the Iranians, they can't back it either, and so something has to give. I think it's fundamentally more likely than anything else, which that taco is the result. And I think no matter what happens, you can forget about midterms. The inflation is going to be so bad.
I think maybe you could even forget about 2028. Would you say?
Oh yeah, I would say so, 100%. Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of it's been quite a challenge to actually say what I really think this past few weeks. I mean, you could guess where I get my geopolitical news from, but I think that. But I wanted to ask you though, and I do wanted to go back to the environmental thing. But in terms of Trump tacoing, in terms of the Iranians being so this wasn't like the 12-day war. They've been so thoroughly pissed off. I mean, essentially, it's imagine if you've redacted the Pope. What would that do to a lot of Catholics around the world, right? Now, of course, a lot of people were saying that Khamenei was a sort of moderating voice. He was going along with a lot of negotiations. There was this absolutely deranged point that I've been hearing that, well, because the Iranians have strike capability well into Europe, allegedly. I mean, I question that. But say, for the argument's sake, they have strike capabilities into huge swaths of Europe and Asia. That was the justification for attacking them first, even though for the past 40 years, the Iranians, I mean, apart from using proxies, they haven't actually just, lobbed munitions at all of their enemies in the region or outside of the region. I think there's a lot of these weirdo neocon talking points that are part of a take economy rather than a sober reflection of what's actually happening and the real implications of what's going on. But I wanted to ask you.
The Iranians.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think that people always use this term proxy. I actually think it's more like allies. I mean, for example, the Houthis are not 12ers. And Hamas are not even Shia, and Hezbollah. If you actually look at these organizations, they aren't just just straight up taking orders from Iran. They never were. They were aligned with them. But these are allies. You don't have to like them. But that's
no, exactly. If we're just looking at a partial, sober geopolitical analysis rather than a moral. And I mean, I think there's morals there.
What you had Shiite militias operating in Iraq. You had Shiite militias operating along with Al-Quds Force, which is the foreign branch of the IRGC in Syria. And you had this kind of branch which led all the way from Iran over to Lebanon. And Iran was pummeled since the 7th of October. Israel decimated Hezbollah. The Syrian regime collapsed. The Syrian regime had actually collapsed in 2013, but it was being propped up by the Iranians for the most part. The Russians
in Russia as well, yeah.
But it was mainly the Iranians in practice. But in any case, that they've taken some serious beating, and then on top of that, the Iranian economy was not doing well at all, and so you did have protests. Now, I'm not going to make any comment as to what I think the casualties were.
We're not going to speculate. That's
because look, all we have are basically Moss numbers and regime numbers, and I don't know what to trust. So I'm just going to ignore that issue. But yes, you did have protests, and so the Iranian regime was not looking great coming into 2026.
A lot of their leadership is old as well. That was another thing.
Wasn't looking great. Now it's looking, actually, I would say, better. They have destroyed a lot of military hardware, but the Iranian regime you would have to be like a horrendous traitor to your people if you're one of these Iranian diasporoids who's like cheering this on.
Pahlavis, like I love bloodthirsty imperialism when it's done there, but I'm a lib when it comes to like living in
It's
France
horrible.
or London
It's
or whatever.
so horrible.
It's terrible. Yeah.
They've said some genuinely horrendous things. Like I can't remember who it was, but they were like, well, okay, maybe we may have those poor schoolgirls, but at least they won't grow up to wear a burqa. Like that's
such
insane.
a psychotic, reprehensible thing to say.
It's so reprehensible on so many levels. Yeah. I mean, they don't. It's not even an Iranian thing. Like nobody wears burqas.
And they're dancing on TikTok to appeal to like Westerners. Like it's it's just the Pahlavis thing is another LARP. That's
I like. I mean, I actually have some appreciation for the final Shah of Iran. I think he was.
The Shah himself was actually a sophisticated guy. Like he did a lot of terrible things, but
I think he was overall a pretty good figure. Although the current one, I completely disavow. Completely disavow this horrible.
His kid,
horrible cock.
Well, that's the thing. A lot of people, not to say too much, but even like the writings of Khomeini and the various geopolitical figures that were advising Washington at the time that had interactions with him. Like, I think the problem is that maybe it could just be take selling. It could just be that there's a lot of manipulation going on with information. But it seems that people are incapable of really thinking about things in a very sober way and really taking into to bear the history of different things and the motivations of different political figures.
But essentially, the geopolitical point I was sort of getting at is
go ahead.
You have this bridge, which you call the axis of resistance, and you can but this bridge where you're like heading towards from Iran through Iraq, and so forth. Now that's all been destroyed, and obviously the Israelis knew what they were doing, and they were really, really thinking of Iran as the great enemy on the chessboard there. Now, again, that's just from a point of view, you're really, really hating Iran. Now, the United States, Iran is not a major threat. It's just not.
Right.
I mean, they're not a friend. They're certainly not a friendly country. But
there will be all sorts of like global war on terror-esque hopes about their Strait capabilities into Europe and all of this sort of like, we're doing the mass weapons of mass like we'll change the other day.
So retrospective because
the weapons of mass destruction discourse all over it.
Yeah, I mean it's so kind of retrospective because like I don't think anybody was thinking about like Iranian ballistic missiles heading towards Europe before anything here happened. I mean, it's just like. Like that was not the radar.
But what I wanted to ask you, a point about history. Okay, I know this is perhaps a stupid question because technological capabilities change in warfare. But for example, a lot of people, they neglect the lessons of the Iran-Iraq War.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the most bloodiest wars of modern history.
Yeah.
And fought for 8 years. No significant territorial changes were made. But the way that the Americans finally stepped in, apart from them joining with the Soviet Union to prop up Saddam, and we all know what happened after that.
Yeah.
The way they stepped in was basically just destroying Iranian capabilities in the Strait of Hormuz and opening up the oil channels. How is it different from now? How come the Americans are finding it so difficult to keep the Strait open nowadays? Is it because the Iranians have greater Strait capabilities, or is it because they're more motivated? They haven't been attenuated after a brutal and bloody war.
The capabilities that the Iranians have to shut down the Strait of Hormuz today are so much better
than it was in the 1980s.
Than it was then, and it was actually not even that bad then. They ended up losing out, but they were able to blow up very, very expensive ship with sea mine. 1987. I mean, this is it was a hard fought victory, but it was indeed a victory for the openers. Whereas today it's actually so bad. One of the things in the Truth Social post, which I find fascinating, is that every time Trump has mentioned opening the Strait of Hormuz,
yes,
he immediately goes to this point about the ungrateful allies and how they should do it because it's their problem. And it's like, he you know, because they mentioned that deleted tweet. There was a deleted post about how they were going to escort things, which was just absolutely blatant market manipulation, because they deleted it and it was a lie. There was nothing of the sort happening. Yeah, none of that talk is there. Like they're talking about these other countries and saying it would be easy for you guys to go and do it. We're not going to do it. Yeah, so I mean, you're not getting any coherent statements about opening it. Which I think the only explanation is that Trump thoroughly shut out any dissenting voices.
Yeah,
there was no, because I guarantee you, any military person, any serious military expert would have told you that, you go in there, you do a decapitation strike on the leader of Iran. That's what you have to contend with, and you have to war game it out. Guarantee you. I just find that impossible to believe.
Or they got Claude AI to map out a plan for them, which is even more scary in a way. That's another thing too that I think, and keep in mind for the audience, we're both biased because I'm Canadian and you're European, but it does seem that there is this incredibly overt hostility towards Europeans and Canadians and allies in general that have been coming from the White House for about a year or so now.
Yeah.
And it seems that a lot of people, they talk about, well, the Europeans have gotten fat with their social programs off of the American security state. But that sort of does go both ways, in the sense of you're getting Europe and the rest of the Western world into this mess, rather not just the Western world, but the whole world in general. But also now you're demanding that because it will impact Europeans more, that they have to pick up the slack. But America's still the world's, mightiest military superpower, so on and so forth. It doesn't make a lot of coherent sense. And this has really gone on. I mean, even under Biden, with the war in Ukraine, I mean, it seems that there is a sense that anything that happens in terms of very heated geopolitical consequences of certain actions, either in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe and so on, or in Asia, God forbid that kicks off sometime. Yeah. It seems that Europeans are the first ones to get shafted. At least that's what the mood feels like. And from a European perspective, what do you make of that? For example, I know that even recently Trump said that maybe the Emiratis could go and open up the Strait, but it's like, who are they going to send? The That's Indian ridiculous. And Pakistani migrants? Like, it's who are they going to send there, right?
Yeah,
these countries are largely a mirage. And I think that when the IRGC said that we're going to redact the idea of Dubai, I mean, as a Bulgarian, I was like, oh, that's but in a sense of like the mirage of like the Dubai and places like that becoming this haven of capital and rich people and celebrity in Hollywood.
That has been destroyed.
Yeah.
Nobody will regard these places ever again as safe places to go and a completely secure location, because there's now been too many times where there's been instability in the Middle East, and these places are now completely and utterly caught up in it.
Have they bombed the Mr. Beast land in Saudi Arabia yet?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But not only are these places, not only have they been affected by this, but actually they haven't had Big Daddy come in and save them. It's not been like, wow, they put everything out. No, it's not gone that way.
But from a European perspective, I think, what would you say is the sort of future engagement with the EU, continental Europe, towards America and towards various involvements in the Middle East and Asia? And from your perspective, do you feel that you are going? Do you think that you are going to face massive energy shortages, massive contractions economically and in terms of resources? Is that a foregone conclusion, or is there some way for Europe to deal with the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians?
I don't think that it's possible for Europe to do this kind of Indian-style diplomacy where you are just trying to be neutral and play everyone off of each other.
Like Turkey.
I don't actually think that people would allow Europe to do that, anyway, including the United States, even if it was under some kind of democratic administration. Because actually, if you look at LNG, American LNG, and pushing internationally American LNG, that's something which is, I think, and this is something that Anas Al-Haji pointed out, this is clearly a deep state project. And the way that you know it's a deep state project is for two reasons. One of them is that Trump, in the 2016 campaign, 2015, 2016, before he gets into the White House, the guy was never talking about LNG. That was still part of the platform. But then when he's actually in his first term, he does. And then actually, he becomes like a professional LNG salesman.
Talks about drill baby drill, frack baby frack.
And then Biden does the same thing. Biden is also hard pushing LNG to Europe and various places.
So in Canada, we have a lot of LNG as well, but it's difficult to get it to Europe in certain.
But essentially, I think that it's an exaggeration. I also don't think that Trump is doing this to become the world's sole LNG dominator. I think that's a little bit reading too much.
Yeah.
But in any case, no, I don't think that Europe is going to be able to play a middle way. Europe basically has to choose between Russia and America, and essentially this has complicated the picture because there are different parts of Europe. It is not a completely unified entity in practice, and Trump is making it as difficult as possible. The whole place was pretty heavily choosing the side of America, and there were consequences to that, and there was difficulties that were arising because of that. But the fact is, Trump is making it as difficult as possible. They're making America into the least attractive ally that you could possibly imagine. Like humiliation, just genuine anger that comes towards Europe, which is kind of, it's almost hard to understand why that vitriol is there, since but it is. And doing offensive wars that shaft Europe directly. And it's and so you're having dissent within the EU. You're having the Belgians saying maybe we should go back to Russia. You're having the Spanish decrying the Americans, and then you're getting Merz in Germany decrying the Spanish, but then kind of flip-flopping the further things go on. Everyone's wavering and has no clue what to do. It's not like 2022 where there is a more or less pretty much unified anti-Russian response. Things are now up in the air. The people have no idea who to turn to. And unfortunately, because of the structure of EU institutions, it's things really are kind of up in the air. And you could see a dissolution of the EU. It's being put under far too much pressure relative to what the institution was ever designed to handle. It was built for a post-World War II order lasting forever because everyone would just love patriotic, constitutional Habermasian patriotism. Sign up for it.
It's funny how on the eve of the Iranian war, not funny, but Sergei Habermas passes away on the eve of
So there is something symbolic there. But in any case, it wasn't designed for this world, and none of the politicians in Europe, these kind of technocrats, were designed for this world. And I think the Republicans are finished for the next election. They're done. There's no recovery. But the fact is that when the Democrats get back in, I suspect you'll probably still get someone who's basically a technocrat. And they won't be able to handle the world we're heading towards, because nothing that has been unleashed here is basically possible to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Well,
not possible. I don't think so.
Yeah, and people were saying Canada is the best example where, a lot of that antipathy that Trumpism and the American right has towards Europe, which has always historically, I think, been there. Even, for example, the John Fonte essay in 2001 on transnational progressivism, great term, but at the same time, there's this element of, those European technocrats with the UN that they're tying America's hands behind its back. And there's this unique threat of European socialism to the cavalier, rugged individualism of the American conservative project. But I think that has really become reified under Trump and especially JD Vance. But you have this thing like in Canada, like not to say Pierre Poilievre's like incredibly weak leader. I mean, just that Rogan interview recently is terrible. But
I'm doing the praise.
Oh, I'm gonna have to cut that one out. No, but yeah, so like, but still though, you have this massive empowering of this sort of like left-wing nationalist anti-Americanism in Europe and in Canada. And even though, I mean, in Canada it's different because all the boomers, they love Carney and they're all, they've become enslaved by the state media. But in terms of the Europeans, I mean, these are unprecedentedly historically unpopular leaders, whether it be Keir Starmer. I don't know. Well, Macron sways here and there. I mean, French politics is very complicated. But Mers, but yet they will be empowered. Like, don't they have that the socialist in Spain recently that's going to be elected or something?
Here's the thing. I think that we are in an era of we're not at the era where mass democracy is itself just going to topple over quite yet.
Right.
Not quite there yet, but what I would
which
say,
leads me to another question I want to ask you. But yeah, finish your point. Yeah.
Is but I think that the place we're at is just permanent incumbency punishment. It's just permanent incumbency punishment. Now, I think that what you're saying is like you are talking about a sort of Pierre Poilievre situation where he was doing well in the polls and you were punishing the unpopular incumbent Canadian Liberals.
Yes.
However, Trump screwed it all up. He screwed it all up. And then it was very easy for Carney to just be like, "Well, I'm the anti-Trump candidate and win."
And I'm not Pierre Trudeau. Justin Trudeau.
My severe skepticism of the average normie, I'm afraid, is just going to have to come out, because the key thing was that was like 6 months up to the election. Yeah. Whereas if it's not 6 months up to the election, it doesn't matter. And so someone like Keir Starmer or the Spanish PM can come off with decent rhetoric. But the fact is that if the economy is doing really badly, leading up to election day, they're going to get punished. And I think that we're not quite at the point where mass democracy is creaking in the West. I don't think we're that far off it, but we're not there yet. But I think we're at the stage of sort of permanent incumbency punishment. Anyone tries to take up the reins, and there is just a level of discontent and a level of economic stagnation where nobody seems to be able to just turn the ship around. They've tried various tactics, they haven't worked. The global trend line of GDP has gone down since 2006. GDP, it kept accelerating. It's now going. It's now a downward trend in terms of growth since 2006. Oil peaked. Conventional oil peaked around 2005, and in 2014, what you saw was a divergence between diesel and oil. And so the correlation between the growth of diesel and the growth of oil was close to 0.99 before 2014. It's now 0.91 since then. And so if you look at American shale oil, it's very light and it's sweet. It doesn't have that much middle distillates, it doesn't have that much diesel. Now, if you look at that stagnation in diesel since 2014, what it has actually meant is that the stagnation in diesel has not come from electrification. It's not come from tech futurism. It has actually just come from a physical stagnation of the fundamental aspects of the economy: steel, plastics, fertilizer. These things themselves have slowed down. And so, for example, if you look at the stagnation of the Chinese economy now, if you look at the stagnation of the Chinese economy, people, look, the Chinese, they just peaked in terms of their emissions. Isn't that great? Isn't that a green story? Well, the answer is that China has used record coal. It just used record coal. Now, so the reason why they emitted less had nothing to do with coal. It simply had to do with the housing crash and the decrease in the cement production. So in other words, it's just the real economy in China has started slowing down. The sort of Chinese effect of pushing up the world economy has ended. And so China is no longer in this period of great growth and great forward thrust. And
Where
I
they
don't
switched to a consumer society, for
yeah,
example.
and
That was, yeah.
I don't think anyone is going to replicate the Chinese competent modernity catch-up experiment. I don't think it's happening, and so I actually think we were already kind of reaching this point of stagnation in the global economy. We were already reaching, there was many signs of it. In the West, we were stagnant for a longer period of time. You know, there's the book, The Rise and Fall of American Growth.
Yeah.
This stagnation, this slowing down, this sense of inertia that I think you can see in the economy, but you can just feel it culturally as well.
Yes.
Has been going on for longer. And this is like a system shocking event, which is turning it over downwards. You know, you had 2008. You had different events which punctured or revealed vulnerabilities, but we were able to kick the can down the road with central banks. We were able to kick the can down the road with money
Yeah.
printing.
The boomer
And
world order just kept kicking the can so they could exploit the
they can't do
401ks.
it.
Yeah.
They can't do it this time. This is too big.
But I wanted to ask you, though, because a lot of people were speculating this. For example, there was this graph that showed a lot of these middle to smaller powers rejecting the sort of like voluntold, if we could use that term. I know it's a stupid term, but the sort of voluntold nature of Trump wanting various American allies to intervene in the Strait of Hormuz. And universally, all of them from Canada to even vassalized states like the UK and Germany
Yeah.
rejecting these proposals. And
Well,
then
you
there
know,
was,
the thing is that
yeah, go ahead, yeah.
these countries, they are vassalized in some senses, but they're also not vassalized in other senses. Because
Right.
an example of this is North Korea. North Korea is basically a vassal state of China. They're completely dependent on China for almost everything.
Right.
They actually have they have trillions of dollars worth of critical materials, which they don't even like extract. So incompetent. But let's just ignore North Korea for that point for a second. They may be a vassal of China, they may be dependent on China, but whenever China have tried to promote like moderate politicians or Chinese aligned they just end up getting killed. Like the North Koreans, they actually exert genuine kinds of leverage. And that's the same thing with Europe. Like, you look, Europe is a vassal of America, but America relies on exporting things and having this huge market that they have access to in Europe to actually prop up a lot of what they're doing and their financial system. You know, it's part of the petrodollar, it's part of different things. And, you know, that's one of the things which Putin obviously got wrong. I mean, I don't think Putin wanted to be cut off from the European market.
No, of course not. He did
In 2022. Now, like, so yes, Europe could not defend itself. It doesn't have the military hardware. It doesn't have the spending. It's very difficult for it to get the spending up based on its political system. But they do have leverage. It's, you know, there's these kind of tape seller positions where it's just like they take a point which is real, which is that some countries are so integrated in the global economy and don't do things, and therefore they have no agency at all.
Right.
And it's, well, that's not true. You're taking the point too far.
Right, but that's what I wanted to ask you, though, is that there were people. I know, for example, Academic Agent was responding to this graph. There was another poster that said that when it comes to soft power, when it comes to the power of the sort of global culture industry, the fabulation machine that is so reliant on the back of transnational progressivism, and it's almost like military might is secondary to that fabulation effect of American cultural hegemony. But as soon as you have a real hard-nosed economic and military crisis, a lot of these powers actually do exert a sense of agency and would reject offers by America. But the question I want to ask you is that then people take that further, not accusing AA or anyone of this, but they'll take that further to say that this is going to be the death of Turbo America. This is the death of the American empire, or at least we're seeing the decline of the quote unquote American empire, to which American people on the right have denied even this term, the global American empire. It doesn't operate like a traditional empire, granted, but do you think that that's just foolhardy? Is that the term I'm looking for? Like, do you think
Mhm.
that's sort of like putting the cart before the horse to say that Turbo America is going to go away, and it's like we're seeing an
I
accelerated
think that
decline?
America is hemorrhaging its soft power for sure.
Yeah,
America does not command the prestige in Europe anymore that it did. Um, it and that really is palpable. I mean, it was cracking with things like Greenland, and now it's like full blown. Like, what the hell are the Americans doing? Um,
right.
in terms of the decline of the American empire, yes, I think that this is a moment of decline for the American empire. I think that there are
Hmm.
a lot of allies which no longer see America as a reliable guarantor of global shipping and safety and security. Like they used to. That's not the world we live in. And the thing is, you know, there are geopolitical third worldist take sellers who over-egged the this conflict, and they came up with these ratios about how much more expensive the American side is in terms of what it's doing compared to what the Iranian. And there were some misleading things that were said there, but the fact is that, okay, America, they have a serious hardware advantage here. They don't have an immediate stockpile problem. Look, you can't just bomb these people with no coherent political objective, exit strategy, or plan. It just doesn't
Right.
even make any sense. Um, and so there are a lot of countries whose trust in America is being hemorrhaged. And there is one point that I really wanted to be specific on, which a number of people get this wrong. Very badly wrong, actually, which is there's just something which is not true. And one thing which is just not true, which I think is important to say, actually, is America is not a net oil exporter.
Hmm.
It isn't. The way in which you come up with the number for America being an oil exporter is pure alchemy, and it's a complete accounting trick. America exports vast quantities of refined petroleum products,
That they get from other sources. Yeah.
but it imports millions of barrels per day of foreign crude because its refinery system is built over several decades to run on medium and heavy sour grades, not the very light sweet oil that's produced in America during the shale boom,
Right.
2005-14 onwards. So there was somebody in the energy world who came up with a very good analogy, which is that if you imported a car and you painted it green and then you exported it, that doesn't make you a car manufacturer. It makes you a green paint salesman.
Right.
And that's what America's doing here. It brings in crude that it's configured to process, runs it through highly complex refineries optimized for heavier barrels, and then it exports the resulting diesel, gasoline, jet fuel, and so forth. So rebuilding the entire refinery fleet to match American crude quality would be a hundreds of billion-dollar process, which would take several years.
It would be like a New Deal project
It
almost.
would be a giant project. It would have labor, permitting, and equipment bottlenecks. And if Trump, now here's the counterfactual, if Trump tried to suppress domestic prices, because here's the thing, WTI, he's done all of these lies to market suppress the price of WTI. Now, a decent part of the reason why WTI has not gone as high as, say, Brent is right now sitting, I think, around $112 a barrel, whereas WTI, West Texas Intermediate, is so Brent is the crude benchmark for North Sea oil. It's one of the now Brent is stored in water and it's sold internationally. Now, whereas WTI is actually stored in Cushing, Oklahoma, and that's why in went to negative $37 a barrel WTI. because essentially everyone was trying to get rid of their oil when you had this demand destruction, and they were all trying to get it into Cushing, Oklahoma to get rid of it, and so they were actually then paying people to get rid of it for a very short period of time.
That was like the food market during Clownvid as well. They would just kept destroying crops and
yeah,
eggs.
absolutely. It was bonkers. But in any case, that's the point is that obviously in the current situation with global shipping, Brent is more directly demanded than the stuff in land, WTI. But in any case, they have done all sorts of market suppression to keep it as low as possible. It's not really working in terms of refined products. People are already noticing that gasoline's gone up, diesel has gone up, fertilizer prices have gone up. Like, it's already started to hit in real terms. But in any case, what they could do, and this is something I've seen some people on Twitter suggest and has been floated a little bit, is what if America did a WTI export ban? What if Trump said, well, we will actually not allow the price of our oil to be bidded up by everyone trying on the international market? What if we just kept our own? What if we just kept our own shale oil and we just used our own oil?
Fortress America idea, which I wanted to talk a little bit about.
America would have a shortfall. They wouldn't have enough, and it would be wrong for their own refineries. And so you would have essentially it would not work. It would take and it would not. It's a really, really. I mean, it's not necessarily a horrendous idea. Although, if they did it, it would destroy American influence because they would no longer actually have that leverage point over the world if they're just using all of it themselves.
Would it be the end of the petrodollar? What people predict?
Exactly. That would be the decisive end of the petrodollar, and it also would not meet American demand. They actually do not have enough oil to meet their own needs, and you would still see, because of the kind of oil they have, you would still see serious inflation in the refined products, the middle distillates, all the things that they really want. You would still see very severe inflation, enough to end any presidency for sure. So I don't think I think it's actually not terribly likely that they will do it. But I'm just saying that for the people who think that America is a net exporter and think that America is energy independent, it is not. That is accounting.
But that's what I mean. Like, Trump has said literally since 2016 that he has, not since 2016, but really especially his latter half of his first term, that America is 100% energy independent. We don't need the world.
It's very much not true. And the thing is that America is not Japan or South Korea. Like, America is not like shafted and completely at the mercy of foreign countries in the case of an energy crisis. Like, that's not true. America obviously has a lot of leverage with it. It is the number one oil producer in the world. But,
of course,
But look, they have a lot of leverage. Don't get me wrong, but it's not close to as much as people think, and it is not energy independence, and that is important to recognize. Until 1970, 70% of all fossil fuels ever burned was just Britain and America by 1970. And that's not true today.
God, no.
Between 2008 and 2010, China used more concrete and produced more of it than the whole of America in the 20th century. That's the world we live in today.
I remember, I wonder what happened to this, because I remember this in Canada. My old man knew a guy who ran a scrapyard. There was this like scrap craze where the Chinese there was documentaries about it. The Chinese, they couldn't get enough of scrap metal. They would send Chinese agents to go throughout all of America and Canada and Europe to buy these huge heaping lots of scrap metal. Whatever happened to that? Is just that they've lessened their reliance on scrap metal? They have their own domestic production now, or
Yeah, I mean, China refines something like 90% of rare earths, China has absolutely dominated the refining industry almost completely. They almost have a corner on the refining industry of metals. So they're not taking in scrap. They are refining metals from ores. They are integrated with all of these. So they bring in. They don't have all of the metals that they want. They have a huge amount of metals that they do want.
Right.
They do have very, very good metal resources in China, but they don't have all of them. But for the ones that they don't have, like say that's something that's produced in Australia or Africa or South America, look, they make the metals and then the Chinese refine them, and it's impossible to compete with the Chinese because the Chinese tax their mining companies at like 0.5%, and they give subsidies to the refiners because the Chinese are not playing ball. You know, if you are a Western capitalist, you want a rate of return on your investment. You want to bring back the money as fast as possible. You want to get a decent margin. The Chinese are saying, no, we will subsidize you to do this because we want strategic dominance in this material, and that's important to our national security. And look, you can't play the capitalist game against the mercantilist opponent. The mercantilist actually wins. And the Chinese, they've been quietly doing this. And I think that the reason why we didn't notice is actually a large part of it is because it was so fast. In 1990, China had half the GDP per capita of Nigeria. In 1990, China had the same copper consumption in absolute terms as Italy.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Needless to say, neither of those things are close to being true anymore.
Right.
So China was unbelievably poor before 1990, like unfathomably poor. And people have no conception of just how poor China was. It was much poorer than India. And today, totally reversed. And it all happened very, very, very fast. And people did genuinely believe in these kind of liberal notions that if the Chinese catch up on wealth, they'll want to be just like us.
Right.
And it's become very clear under Xi Jinping that that's not the case, because Xi Jinping is very much a follower of his father, Xi Zhongxun. And Xi Zhongxun, he visited America. And when he visited America, he saw that one of these kind of intentional Christian communities. And when he visited, he saw that it had been converted into a holiday theme park. And he was deeply moved by this experience, this kind of horror that this great collectivist experiment had just turned into this consumerist project. And Xi Zhongxun said that China, they need to be thinking not about the first generation and not about the second generation, because the first generation are the Chinese revolutionaries, and the second generation are children who grew up on their father's lap hearing about what he did in the revolution. These are people, and so they're 100% loyal, and that is Xi Jinping. And that's almost all of the Chinese leaders since Mao Zedong have been this exact generation of grew up with their dads in the revolution. Now, he said, well, it's when you get that second degree removed that you start to get this reformism, and you start to get this wavering, and you start to get that loss of zeal, that loss of impact. And Xi Jinping, he also wrote about this, and he said, we never want to go back to the world of dynastic cycles. We want to constantly rebaptize the people in the flame of revolution. And that is Xi Jinping. That is his world. He is a communist, and like his father said that we have to sinicize and indigenize communism. And obviously that's people know socialism with Chinese characteristics. But the point being that Xi Jinping is actually a leader like Khamenei. He is a man of his belief, and the way in which that cashes out in practice is obviously very complex. The Tarigian is an excellent writer about communist regime changes within communism. So the succession crisis between Khrushchev and Brezhnev. He's written a paper about that. He's written all of these things. And what's fascinating is how is it that people who are these diehard, how does all this internal mechanisms work? And what happened in the 1980s is that you had people who were the so-called moderates in the regime, who were the main implementers of Deng Xiaoping. And
The
Hu Yaobang,
dingus, you mean? Yeah.
yeah. And so the thing is, Hu Yaobang was the liberal, and his funeral was part of what sparked the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest. So his funeral sparked these events. It's actually very similar to the events which inspired Les Miserables in 1832. The failed French Revolution of 1832 was actually sparked by the funeral of this popular general under Napoleon, who was known as a friend of the people. But in any case, what you saw is something very similar, is that these protests were sparked by the death of this liberal reformer, this friend of the people. Now, what the actual archives show, what the actual Chinese archives show, is nothing of the sort. Hu Yaobang was not a liberal. The problem is, if you are taking the orders directly from someone above you, in this case Deng Xiaoping, and he's telling you, we need to maintain political control of China through the CCP and maintain a kind of an orthodoxy and a sense of continuity with the past and the revolution. But we also need to open up and change the economy and so forth. And how is it that you, as the implementer of these ambiguous commands with very difficult lines to very, very difficult contradicting impulses to maintain at the same time, how is it that you implement that in practice? Turns out it's extremely difficult. And under the Maoist era, that's how everybody was. But
Yeah,
Deng Xiaoping was not so bloodthirsty, and so Hu Yaobang, he simply fell out of favor. But he was not a liberal. It's just that it's like Deng Xiaoping, it's like, you're just not guessing what I'm saying. You're not grokking it. You're not quite.
Well, from what I understand, like with Dengism, they had the ability to tell the Chinese populace, which I think is very alien to a lot of other people around the world. Like, listen, things are going to suck for a few generations.
Yeah.
Just hang in there, trust the plan. Eventually, we'll open things up. We'll slowly start to integrate into the world economy. And we have to do these things in a very conscious and deliberate way that might entail temporary suffering. By temporary, they mean, a few generations. But But eventually we'll get there.
My real point is that for now, within the CCP, and it may change in the future, and not everyone is Orthodox, but for now, the CCP is best understood as quasi, like the Iranian regime. This is the same thing would happen if you Xi Jinping and you did this decapitation of the leadership. The institution of the CCP would survive, and you would not see. That would be my strong prediction. This actually is, these people believe in what they're doing, and you don't have to agree with them. You might say, from an external point of view, outside the CCP, well, this is incoherent. This isn't real Marxism. This isn't blah blah blah.
This isn't real Marxism.
I know you might say that, and you might indeed right, because
of course,
but I'm not trying to dispute that. I'm just saying that if you want to understand these people and what's going on in their heads and what they actually believe about what they're doing, they believe it.
Right. Yeah. But would you say that Xi Jinping is sort of like, in terms of his style of leadership, he is sort of like a neo-Maoist figure, or he's like a return to more of that explicit strongman?
I would not say that he is a neo-Maoist. I think that he believes that he is communist, and he believes that it's for the greater good of China. He believes he's maintaining the revolution, but he uses this term historical nihilism, which is the idea that the CCP never made mistakes. It went through contradictions, and it went through suffering and internal distress in order to reach a kind of a dialectical configuration and reconciliation. And so the CCP, it never makes mistakes. It's but if things went wrong, they had to go wrong in order to make the journey to where we are. And so I don't think he's a neo-Maoist, but he is a true believer, and he does believe in trying to keep cohesive this project. And for me, I think it's remarkable that there are extant writings, there are archives of Xi Jinping before he comes to power and after he comes to power. And for some reason, people have not taken the time to try and figure this guy out, even though he's like one of the most important world leaders. As like, you look at the amount of which people have tried to get inside Putin's head,
Yeah.
and Trump's head, and I'm like, why the fuck are you not doing the same thing for Xi Jinping? He's pretty important. He's pretty important, you know. I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying I'm an expert. I've just read some stuff, and that's what I've come to from. But yeah.
What was Xi Jinping's attitude towards Dangism? You would think, was he like a believer? Like he was
Well,
obviously.
I think that I'm very much of the view that Deng Xiaoping was also a true believer.
Yeah.
I think people greatly exaggerate this kind of mythic notion that he's this pragmatic reformist, and it's to an extent true that is an aspect of it. But he was also a true believer, and the way in which he came to power, the way in which Deng Xiaoping outmaneuvered Hua Guofang actually had nothing to do with the fact that Hua Guofang is this kind of static Maoist. Nobody believes that
Right.
today in terms of the archives. What the way in which he came to power is he had street cred as someone who had been there from the beginning and was popular with the People's Liberation Army. And so he was Deng was quite a dictatorial figure, quite an authoritarian figure.
Yeah.
It was not about collective leadership. It was not about, he was a cult of personality, and he ran China with an iron fist. And he did believe that things had to change, but his hand was forced because China had actually imploded. They had actually lost control, and it had to be reasserted, and they were forced. The Chinese communists, they didn't reform because they wanted to. They reformed because they had to.
Right.
Like the fiscal state had imploded. The actual physical presence of the cadres in the countryside had imploded, and so they kind of had to accept things were going to change. And he got in there via this kind of these kind of esoteric mechanisms, but he was kind of the right man of the hour, I would say. Yeah, I mean, certainly you did not want.
Well, he found a way to curry favor with the Politburo as well.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Yeah. But I wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you. I wanted to game out this scenario about American independence. Okay, so the people that are saying people that are like hardcore plan trusters that are talking about how in the future an engagement with Iran is not about a certain other nation in the Middle East. It's really about going after China. Okay, I wanted to ask you, in a fantastical scenario.
This is something which really irritates me as well, is that Trump keeps saying that China gets 90% of their oil from Hormuz, and it's like 40%. It's just like, why do you have to lie? Like, it's actually just not true. They get a lot of oil from there. They get more oil than you do, but it's not 90%. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But say, like, in some fantastical scenario, there is full-on regime change in Iran. Trump controls the Strait of Hormuz. He renames it Strait of America. What? They can't just deny China oil. Like, I mean, wouldn't that entail massive economic reprisals from China? They would just basically say, well, we're going to take a hit, but if it really means war, then we're just going to deny America huge swaths of our industrial economy. Like this, there is no like, this is why I could never understand this notion of there's going to be a pivot to Asia, meaning we're going to basically crush Chinese dominance in the afterbirth. And I'm not like a big China show. I'm not like a Cinnaboo or whatever, but I'm saying that the only logical way, I wanted to ask you about this, the only logical way I could see this happening would be if America were to achieve a form of industrial independence. They would first have to find a way to have domestic microchip production, then hard industries, then plastic crap after that. That would literally take generations. That would take a bigger than New Deal. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, what do you think about all this? Yeah.
There's a lot of America could use the oil weapon against China in order to say the current way in which things happen, where you have all of the metal leverage and you have the manufacturing leverage, but we have the oil leverage. You're exerting too much control, and we don't like that, and we don't trust it. And we're going to have to get you to accept less power in this way, we're going to have to move to a different order where we do more manufacturing, and you can increase the standard of living of your people by doing more consumption. I mean, it would actually increase the standard of living in China if they didn't have such a manufacturing dominated economy. And we have to come to some kind of accommodation. I think that could be achieved through a combination of slow industrial policy, exploiting the very real American resources, leveraging griefs that people have with China in various regions, which are very real, and leveraging the fact that that China is not an oil superpower. I think you can actually. There are options there. I think that none of it is being coherently pursued at the moment. I don't see American reindustrialization happening. They lost 90. They lost basically 100,000 jobs in the industrial sector last year.
But that was the promise. At least the hope of MAGA was that Trump would be this Caesar Augustus figure to come and reindustrialize America, to think about America's future. But I don't see that happening.
No, it's not happening. I mean, for example, if you look at tariffs, I'm actually not terribly opposed to tariffs if they're part of a wider strategy. For example,
thank you for listening to the Content Minded podcast. If you wish to support me and listen to every episode in full, then please go to patreon.com/giantproductions and substack.com/Geo's Content Corner. There you will find the full archive of every content-minded episode, as well as every Giant Review episode, and exclusive to all patrons, the weekly Cole Report, where I break down interesting stories and discourse from throughout the week. Subscribe today to keep the content renaissance alive.